Excited to have you all here today. I think we should probably just do some introductions. Maybe we should start with you, Dan, and come around just so everyone knows who we have on the panel.
Okay, hi, I'm Dan Adams. I'm one of the Deloitte partners with Deloitte Digital out of London. I lead the Vodafone Centre for Health with Deloitte from the Deloitte side.
Thank you. Raquel.
And my name is Raquel Katigbak. I am a global client partner for Vodafone within IBM, and I'm also an IBM Distinguished Industry Leader, looking at innovation and really purpose-driven technology and solutions.
Hi there. So my name is Markus Ogurek. I am leading for Commscope the networking, cellular, and security businesses, and I'm based in the US.
Good to see that. Okay, there's definitely fan groups here. Dan, I mean, you need to get your people to make some more.
Sorry, come on! Thank you.
Dan.
All right, you know what? I wish I had some people. You guys have all got massive fan groups, clearly. Okay, so let's talk about, we're all here to talk about digital transformation, very commonly used term. Every industry is going through challenges. Every industry is trying to think about what this means and thinking about change. So, Markus, if you don't mind, I'll come to you first.
Okay.
Should we be thinking about change now as just this ongoing state of affairs? It should be baked in rather than seen as a project, if you like.
Yeah, look, it's a good point. You know, I think back into my early years and we thought about transformation as something that starts and it ends. I think today we are in a very different reality. Transformation is something that is happening permanently. It's happening in response to market environments, it's happening in response to technology capabilities, and it's happening also due to competitive pressures, but also opportunities. So my perspective is, and the way how we operate at Commscope is, we have actually a permanent team of transformation officers that are literally just driving change, permanent change, in collaboration with our partners and customers.
Okay, correct, cool. Raquel, we'd like to jump in on that. Sort of like, this is a constant state of affairs we're in now, right? It's not something where we kind of, okay, so it's 2023, let's think about our digital transformation. It's something we should be thinking about every single day in terms of our business activities.
Change is constant.
Right.
Right. So I think part of what we really pride ourselves within IBM is really how we drive data-driven transformation. So how do you find the impact and the outcome from the transformation that can be measurable, that can also be optimized in terms of programs, so that you can get the most out of the investments that are being made either in cultural transformation or technology transformation, because those things tend to go hand in hand. Most of the time, actually, and maybe Markus, you would agree, and also Dan, a lot of the investment is actually made primarily on the technology side.
Yeah.
But in fact, the people aspect of it is infinitely more important, because in the end, it has to be, transformation is really grounded within the employee experience or the human experience at the center of it.
Okay, Dan, same question to you.
I mean, change can be so slow, can't it, as well? We can, I think one of the things about health industry, the future is here already. It's just not evenly spread out. And there are, there are so many hospitals, even in the UK, at all different levels of maturity of the change that they need to get to. And then there's little changes that should be just BAU to bring in, but then there's huge revolutionary changes. How can you completely change, say, a health care pathway? One of the examples that we were discussing in the briefings around the change in skin analytics for cancer research. So rather than just changing, just improving the way a doctor looks at a skin lesion, we now have in the Birmingham hospital, them taking images of skin and then putting that up into AI tool, and that AI tool makes a decision as to whether it needs to have more research or not, more investigation on that or not. And that's a complete change to the care pathway. It's not a little thing, and it will take a decade to take that through the NHS to make that the norm. But then there are other changes, other small changes, optimization of what we do that we need to do all the time.
Okay, yeah, so let's stay with the organizational side of things. Markus, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay. So let's think about how we embed technology in our businesses, both in terms of our organization, but also in terms of our people. how best to address this in order to get the right fit, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think, when I think back about our history as well at Commscope, we have a tradition of being, very strong infrastructure providers, from connectivity into networking, cellular. So it's a broad portfolio of products. But I think today's world, it's very, very complicated. It got complex technology. And if you think about the next, era of technology, whether it's, metaverse or VR, AR, 5G, I don't think we can afford to think in products anymore. It needs to be a solution approach that provides, that leads with simplicity, addresses a business problem or an opportunity. And what is required to lead with solutions is, on one hand, internally, we are looking at how do we upskill our people? How do we evolve our organization to think in this way, to think more as a software-led company as well, where our intelligence is shifting from the product level, from an infrastructure level, into the software that we build to coordinate basically our workloads. Secondly, I think also it's something that we have completely evolved into playing through partnerships. And I think that's crucial in today's world, as we are trying to simplify technology for our customers in order to drive adoption. These partnerships have become more important than ever before, because customers don't want to deal with the concern of how do they actually run a cellular 5G private network, for example, where they have never been exposed to. They don't have necessarily the skills. And so we are thinking about how do we partner, bring the right companies together with the capabilities to deliver an easy solution that can be implemented, is user-centric, and drives value for the customers.
Raquel, you were nodding there. Was it what?
Absolutely. I think so. I think an interesting position that IBM has taken is that we want to be co-creating with our clients and really focusing on helping them become a catalyst for change, either within their organization from a digital transformation perspective or within their industry, and potentially even cross-industry. And I think what really resonates for me right now is this concept of an ecosystem mindset.
Yeah.
So how do we bring together cross-industry solutions that really can improve the quality of life for patients in the healthcare space, for the engineering worker on the manufacturing side, or even the airline pilot or the baggage worker, So how do we start to bring together that, and I think start to drive the industry more towards an open co-opetition framework that also embraces the core capabilities within the telco community, which is obviously my home industry, but also now spanning that connectivity outwards.
Yeah.
So what are the digital solutions for a digital society where we really embed at its center the good and the purpose-led innovation that we want all of us as individuals to really exploit?
Yeah. I mean, Dan, Raquel just mentioned that you're working obviously a lot in the healthcare space. It'd be really, I think, useful if you could kind of give us a sense of how digital has transformed healthcare, since you've been kind of working in that area, and also where you think it's going next.
If I answer the second bit first, where's it going next? The vision that the NHS has and the other country healthcares have is to move it from being an organizational center to a human-centered healthcare. And that kind of sounds like the fluffy words, but rather than you going to the hospital and getting your care, the hospital will come to you. And that's the fundamental thing. And by within 10 years, we would expect that there will be far, far less hospital visits. Hospitals are horrible places. They're full of germs, are really expensive to run. Beds are uncomfortable, right? You want to be at home. Everybody gets better at home when they take care of themselves, as long as you can get the right care into the home. And so though you'll see a lot less reasons to visit the hospital. And we were taken through just last week by one of the NHS CIOs, this lovely experience it's a lovely experience. The guy died at the end of it, but the experience he went through was a lot better than being stuck in a ward on his own with people he didn't know. and instead was able to get the support from his family all the way through the last 2-3 months of his life without having to go into hospital, but yet getting the right care. So what's interesting, we asked one of the digital doctors, the digital officers at one of the hospitals, so what have you been doing has actually made a difference so far in digital? And the thing they said that had the return on investment was that skin analytics example. That's the one where they did have a wait list of 550 and they got it down to 30 using digital analytics. And actually on that one, although the AI is analyzing it, it's only making a recommendation. And so a human involved in every single decision based on the recommendation, and the AI is learning all the time. But it just completely changes the level of productivity.
I mean, there can be obviously, much greater accuracy from an AI as well. There's the work that DeepMind did with Moorfields, where they, worked on radiology, looking at sort of like X-rays that, were revealing macular degeneration, and they were far more accurate, meaning that the ophthalmologists can spend more time with patients. So I guess.
But I think what you want is the doctor with the machine. That's the thing, because they might go, you think this bit's wrong. Actually, they go, that's where it's wrong. That's where the problem is. And it's sometimes the extra question that they can ask. But the AI is amazing, what it can pick up on.
Yeah. I think when we talk about AI, it's really also important to think about data in general and what is trustworthy AI. To your point about it's not this one, it's that one.
Yeah.
So how do you train your models? You mentioned it also in your keynote, the proliferation of AI. So how can we ensure that the data that we're training these models on is non-biased? Yeah. Because the data actually runs who gets mortgages, who gets jobs, who gets into colleges. So how do we ensure as a society and as organizations working in the field of data and AI that this is a non-biased model? So I think one of the areas certainly within IBM that we're heavily focusing on, and a lot of research is being put in there, is effectively understanding how to contract the bias models in AI as well.
It's really interesting actually. In the early days of COVID, you heard that ethnic minorities were getting higher rates of fatality, and that was partly because the oxygen monitors on the fingers were not calibrated to darker skins, which is horrendous. To think that that's true. And actually, Lisa, I'll bring Lisa into the discussion. She was one of her things today was the group that is least looked after is black females, and how you bring that into the model. But of course, AI, as long as you fill it with enough information, it can be much less biased. The right AI with the right data is much less biased than human.
I want to come back to and ask you a little bit more about this kind of idea of change and bringing diversity into organizations, Raquel. But Markus, let me come to you to talk about manufacturing. Okay. Give us a sense of what changes you anticipate. We have enormous supply chain, geopolitical headwinds. Shall we anticipate major changes, more localized manufacturing? How do you see the marketplace developing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So look, I think there's so many forces at play right now. We are living through a supply chain crisis, geopolitical instability, and if I think about manufacturing by itself, manufacturing is something that has been built and developed over decades. Yeah, the supply chain that we have today, we cannot change it in 1 or 2 years. Yeah, it's a very complex setup, and so the way how we are thinking about our own supply chains as well is, we need to think about where do we build up resiliency and de-risk our production in order to serve our customers better going forward. And de-risking means, working on alternatives, changing our products, creating new partnerships and bringing certain workloads as well, potentially into the country. So there's, of course, government regulations that are being imposed now as well to build either in Europe or build in the United States. And so that's a process that we are working on. But from a technology perspective, what I just heard here from Dan and Raquel is, we talk about AI, but AI is typically just one piece of a solution. It talks to an application, it uses data, and it requires connectivity. And so when you think about this from an ecosystem perspective, it's not enough just to reach maturity within one piece. You need to bring everything along. You need to bring the application, the connectivity, the compute power as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of thinking today about, how do we run certain workloads in the future in particular? Should they run in a cloud? Should they run on-premise, at the edge? And we truly believe that, going forward, we will have a hybrid model. And that's what we see right now. So more and more workloads are moving as well now back from the cloud into the network edge, simply due to latency and due to the bandwidth that we require in order to perform a certain operation. So just to give one example, maybe how we think about industrial manufacturing, we are using our connectivity solutions, in particular small cells, one cells, and DAS systems, in order to span a 5G network across factory floors. And so we are collaborating with some of the large partners like Microsoft, for example, who are providing their HoloLens solution, integrating it into our application stack, into our connectivity stack, in order to, for example, provide augmented reality instructions on how to run a machine, how to remediate a potential incident or an error. So we are today able, this is still in trial, we are doing this in our Shakopee facilities in Minnesota, but it's something that is incredibly promising for us, because it not only reduces your downtime, because we can straight away interact with the specialist, whoever the specialist is based, and it also reduces our costs, because we don't need these resources basically on site. So these are technologies that are brought to life, and they serve a real business purpose, enabling our business. Yeah.
Raquel, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay, because we touched on something that I'd love to dig a little bit deeper and get your thoughts on. So obviously most organizations are built to kind of optimize business outputs. And I'd love to get your thoughts on how we optimize for change. How do we optimize for inclusivity? We know that inclusive, diverse organizations are stronger. How do you think about that?
So I think fundamentally it's really about understanding leading indicators. There is a war on talent today, which is a very immediate and urgent need, right? So organizations that have a very strong diversity and inclusion programs that can empower their employees to really learn and upskill are the ones that are going to be able to nurture that talent even better than organizations that don't. So I think, and I can only speak from my experience working within IBM, which is there are not just formal programs about learning what change and diversity really means, and tying that to the business benefit for the organization, so people, planet, profit, right? Triple bottom line. But also informal communities that need to be nurtured and encouraged to really grow. And I think personally for myself, I have a child who is non-binary. I am obviously a female of color. I have been able to tap into organizations and communities within IBM that enabled me to really grow as an individual. And by the way, have incredibly opened up my own professional network as a result. And so I think there's talent in all of these different intersectional identities. And I think it's really the onus is now on the organization to really recognize how to effectively tap into that. And it could be change agents who really put the banner forward, but it also needs to be coming from top down. So there is, I think, a need again to really look at leading indicators for how employees feel nurtured and cared for within the organization, so that you don't lose talent, which is so precious and rare these days.
Thank you. Dan, I'd love to just dig a little deeper on healthcare as well. So clearly healthcare is an enormous industry, and here in Western Europe we are fortunate enough to have sort of like very mature healthcare industries, but often maybe not highly funded, maybe sort of like facing kind of challenges to do with finances and to do with patient delivery. How do you think technology can be better employed in order to sort of, really drive better patient outcomes at scale? Like, how do you think about that?
So, bringing the care to the remote. I'll give you an example. In one of the Swindon hospitals that we work with, they have a company called Health Heroes. And just at Christmas, the Department of Health said, guys, you've got to get everybody out of your wards because there's going to be a surge coming, a surge of COVID coming. So they took 200 people out of the wards, sent them home, gave them monitoring equipment, and Health Heroes have their own clinicians that do the monitoring as well. They phone up and check that they're okay. And so they were able to move from a ratio of 20-1 patients to healthcare workers to 100-1 patients to healthcare workers. So this is how technology, sending people home, using the right technology, can then make enormous efficiencies in the level of healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that doing something at scale though is pretty. Doing something at scale.
Well, I mean, that is at scale. If you can move everybody out of your secondary healthcare, move them into tertiary, right, you can move them on as fast as possible. I think there's some crazy statistic about 25% of hospital beds in the UK are currently with people that could be sent home, but there's no care for them at home. Yeah. So if you can upgrade that care, you can use technology to upgrade that remote care. And it's not very complicated. I mean, the Health Heroes got the same patient outcome, and all they were doing was phoning up and saying, what's the number on the on the machine reading? That's all they were doing. They didn't have any connected capability. And so if you can move that onto connected capability, then it really is at scale. Because the weird thing about healthcare is so human intensive. It's about 1 in 50 people work in healthcare. It's incredible. 10% of our GDP in Western Europe is spent on healthcare. It's incredibly intensive. It's actually really well funded. It's just really expensive to do it is the problem. And in particular with an aging population. So it's about that remote care. It's keeping them out of hospital, but getting them better health outcomes as a result.
So I've got a question for all of you now. And I appreciate, Markus, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm going to ask you first. But it's a tough one, because I'm asking you to predict what's going to happen in the next few years. No one would have anticipated maybe where we are right now. But I'm interested to get your thoughts, and apologies for putting you on the spot first. What do you think the major challenges are going to be for industry in the coming years, and how best to address those challenges?
Yeah. And I think there's maybe not just a single answer, because it's a very complex development we are going through. And I truly believe we are, again, at a technology inflection point where technology is disrupting all our lives. And we had these inflection points in the past, but I think one of the probably most critical points that I see and our organization is working on is really sustainability. Yeah. How do we address energy consumption, make our products more efficient? Because we mentioned the word scale a couple of times in today's conversation, and scale means we need more compute, we need more technology to run, process data, output information. And I think we have to find a very, very serious solution on how do we deal with energy consumption and carbon emission. And so at the product level, we are continuously innovating at Commscope on how do we make this product more efficient. We bring the new technology in, we collaborate with our partners, but then when it comes to really enabling this change, it's really about packaging it all into a solution across the ecosystem of partners. So I think sustainability is the first one, and I think the second one I would mention is again the ecosystem. And I would probably use one example which kind of reminds me quite often of learning from the history and from the past. When the MP3 player was invented, I believe it was in 1998. It didn't find any adoption, and by the time when Apple released Steve Jobs released the first iPod. It was 2001, so it was 3 years later. And the reason why, at this point in time, there were already, I believe, 40 to 50 different MP3 players. None of them were successful. But what happened in 2001 is that many countries started to deploy broadband to their households.
Yeah.
So it goes back again to this ecosystem of you can have an excellent solution, but if it is, for some reason, not driving business value, not adding the benefit that is expected because the broadband is not there, the capacity is not there, it is likely to fail. So therefore, I think the timing and the ecosystem play is just so important to make sure that we bring these solutions together and they support each other and they enable this business value that we are expecting to achieve. Yeah.
Also, the MP3 player, if I'm correct, invented a German academic institution which maybe didn't know how to commercialize it. I don't know.
That's not why I brought it up, by the way.
Raquel, same question to you. What are the major challenges you see over the coming years? And I know it's so hard to sort of, figure out what even next month's going to look like, let alone in 5 years' time, and how best to address them.
I really want to build on what Markus was saying, because I think part of it is around how do we tackle these big societal challenges like sustainability together? How can we create ecosystem mindset and actually instantiate those ecosystems across industry? And I think one enabler of that is actually brokerage of data between organizations and enterprises across industry. Right now, there's a lot of value that is inherently stuck within proprietary data within a specific industry or specific organization. I would love to really see the reality where we have an ability to share data more freely, still, of course, aligned to data governance, data sovereignty rules, data privacy rules for individuals between organizations, because I think that really opens up the whole aperture around cross-industry innovation to tackle the societal changes. I also think there's a massive position for consumer ownership of our own generated behavioral data. So I'm talking moving from Web 2 to Web 3.
Right.
And what are the key principles of Web 3 that can really ground the consumer with consent, permission data that they can also, we as individuals can also monetize.
Right.
And I think that business model is a really interesting one to explore. And I'm hopeful, I don't know if I'm going to predict it, because I'm seeing some movements there that are thinking, is Web3 going to become a reality? But I'm hopeful that given enough prototyping of use cases and given organizations like telcos who want to stand alongside of their consumers, we can actually make that a reality, even in a small form that would then be a journey towards that. So I think it's data on the enterprise side, ownership of data and permission data from a consumer side, and together we can really change the world, I would say.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I do kind of think that we have a great opportunity here at the moment with Web3 because, or with 3.0, I know they're different things, but, we are such a long way from the original vision of the web.
Yeah.
And I guess the challenge is how do we prevent the same mistakes that are happening with a very small number of gatekeepers leveraging, individual users' data. And I guess the question, okay, I'm going to frame a question, apologies. And maybe it's to all three of you. Do you think there is a significant shift? Raquel, you talked about breaking down data silos. Now, that's a tough thing for large organizations to kind of get into. I think there's a growing appetite for private individuals to see their data as a valuable commodity and maybe think about how they use that data. And we're seeing so Tim Berners-Lee, for instance, starting a very new, to my mind, I know they're working, I don't think they're working with the Luxembourg government, but I know they're working with some EU countries to think about how his new technology, which basically gives data sovereignty to individuals, can kind of be folded into sort of like larger enterprise style data plays. So I guess the question for all three of you is like, how's our attitude to data going to change in the coming years? Are consumers going to get a little bit more? And I guess maybe Dan, I'll come to you because healthcare data is so And I think we're all very happy to share it with, for instance, the National Health Service, because it's sort of public good. But I'm a little less happy maybe by sharing it with, I don't know, Babylon, privately owned company that the NHS is partnering with. How do you think about that?
It's one of those things, what you worried about. You know, individuals will, the vast majority of individuals would share their data to be able to have a better drugs prediction, to be able to get better skin analytics. They would share them for those reasons. Unfortunately, what really holds back digital transformation is a few people, maybe 1-2% of people, who are really, really stubborn about it, really, really don't want to be able to share that data anyway. And then that makes a whole load of gates for everybody else's data and non-anonymity of the data. And things like you do clinical trials, you can't then add that data back into the original, once you've found something out, it's really hard to then add it back into the original record because you have to go back through the anonymity. So I think it does hold things back. I would share my data. I'm not that worried about people knowing my DNA. It's all right, you know, it's really similar to everyone else's.
We could clone you.
Yeah.
There could be lots of you running around.
Oh, terrible, you know.
Same questions, both of you. I've just turned over my shoulder. We're out of time, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. Do you think, maybe Raquel, come to you first, and then you, Markus, different changing attitudes, do you think, to privacy and data in the coming years? How do you think that's going to play out?
I think it really comes down to consumer understanding of the power that they actually have on the economy.
Okay, thank you. Concise.
I think also there's a generational shift here where, you know, the younger generation that kind of grows up with social media and the current technology environment is way more receptive to sharing data.
Yes.
You know, I think I have 3 boys and they actually don't care, you know, for them it's just open book,
Yeah.
Whereas we are way more suspicious what's happening in the background.
Yeah.
And I do believe that, you know, future policies will need to change to protect them in a different way somehow, I think, the new generation, so it's interesting how this is going to work out,
It would be nice to see much more decaying of data, so that photos of my kids they take when they're 18 at their party don't exist anymore when they're 23, 24. And I think it's reasonable. It didn't happen to me. No one could have come and got my photos from a party 4 or 5 years later, but it does happen to younger generations, and I think that's unfair. So a lot more decaying of data. Share it, but then let it die.
All right, well, lots to follow up on in conversations this evening over drinks. I think we barely scratched the surface. I got through 1 page of my questions. So thank you, all 3 of you, for sharing your thoughts. It was fascinating. And thank you to all the fandoms for showing up as well. Good to have you.
Woo!